एरिक के को-फाउंडर रशल नेपियर ने भी हमसे खास बातचीत में कहा कि पिछले 2 से 3 सालों से आरबीआई का स्टांस काफ़ी बेहतर रहा है। उनके मुताबिक भारत की मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी दूसरे डेवलप्ड मार्केट से काफ़ी बेहतर है।
It has a level of debt to GDP which is perfectly manageable for an economy like India. It doesn't need to take these extreme actions of the developed world. And if it takes that choice, and just because you have a choice doesn't mean to say you take it. There are lots of politicians in the world who make the wrong choice, even though they have lots of choices. I'm arguing that the developed world really doesn't have very many choices anymore. It's kind of path dependent on its policy. But if India can avoid making those mistakes of aping the mistakes of the developed world in terms of financial repression, it will still have to cope with inflation, imported inflation. But the RBI policy should ensure that we don't generate huge levels of domestic inflation. And there is a positive from all of this for India. There is one positive from financial repression in the developed world for India, which would be significant capital inflows. The first rule of financial repression is get your money out of the country. And if that's going to be true for Japan, for the Eurozone, for the United Kingdom, and ultimately even for the United States, where's it going to go? And if the RBI can continue with a sound, stable monetary policy, and the government of India can avoid accelerating repression, there are some repressionary elements left from the license rise. They've tended to linger, but they're been slowly dwindling. But as long as they stay where they are and don't go back up again, then I think India will attract a large amount of capital. So there are positives and negatives in all of this for India. But if the government plays its cards right, I think ultimately the positives will be more important. And then we have to weather the storm on the energy price. And of course, it's a very volatile price and it can collapse just as easily as it can soar. And a lot of that will depend upon the decisions made in Saudi Arabia. And we forget that sometimes, but we may not have to live with high energy prices for much longer if a deal can be done with Saudi Arabia. It can be wrong, particularly if we change the nature of the system. So this has really been that call that I've made since May 2020. It wasn't just that inflation was going up, is that the nature of the system was changing and it was becoming a less market-orientated system and a system more driven by government intervention. It's been obvious in the bond markets for many years. That was central bank intervention obviously played a huge role in shaping yield curves, spectacularly so in Japan as we speak, but also in the United States of America. And I would ask those who are taking their measures of future economic activity for the bond market to think back to May 2000 and tell us what the bond yield was getting right about the outlook for growth and inflation. And even if it was getting it right in the direction, was it anywhere close to getting it right in the magnitude? Now, there are two elements to the manipulation of bond prices, and one is that central bank intervention, but the second is a growing financial repression, forcing financial institutions to buy these bonds. And it's at a relatively small level at the minute, but there are certainly US institutions, particularly in the life insurance industry, that find themselves having to buy the bonds. So it's almost the last refuge of the scoundrel to say, here's a market price that isn't a market price. It's an easy way to dismiss anything, to say it's ceased to have these values, but that is the call. It's a structural change in how the system works.
तो यहाँ पे आप सुन रहे थे व्यू पॉइंट जो कि आरबीआई के रिगार्डिंग था। और अब अगर आप बाज़ार पे अगर वापस लौट रहे हैं ना